Natalie's hands trembled as she held up the small golden costume, the puffed sleeves, the maroon sash, the crumpled paper crown. She'd recognize it anywhere. It was the prince costume from the school play 5 years ago. The same costume Marco Reyes was wearing when he vanished without a trace. But this wasn't the school's storage closet or the Reyes family home. This was the dusty attic of a house that once belonged to a man she'd never met. A dead man with no connection to Marco. So why was the missing boy's costume here, hidden among cobwebs and forgotten things? And what else might be hidden in this house? Before we begin, I'm curious where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below. If you're new here, subscribe now for more mind-blowing stories. Natalie Hayes loved being a kindergarten teacher in the small town of Oak Ridge. With its tree-lined streets and tight-knit community, it felt like the safest place on earth to raise children. The kind of place where everyone knew your name, where parents let kids ride bikes until streetlights came on, and where tragedy was something that happened elsewhere. Until it didn't. 5 years ago, Natalie directed the annual spring play at Oak Ridge Elementary. The theme was Fairy Tale Forest, featuring 20 kindergartners dressed as princesses, knights, fairies, and woodland creatures. 5-year-old Marco Reyes was cast as the young prince, a role his parents said he practiced for endlessly at home, wearing his golden tunic and paper crown around the dinner table. On the night of the performance, the auditorium was packed. Parents clutched cameras, grandparents dabbed proud tears. Natalie stood in the wings, helping nervous children remember their lines. "You look very handsome, Prince Marco," she had told the boy, adjusting his crooked paper crown. His brown eyes had sparkled with excitement. "I'm not scared at all, Miss Hayes," he had declared, bouncing on his toes in his shiny black dress shoes. That was the last time anyone saw Marco Reyes. Somehow, between his first scene and his second entrance, the boy vanished. At first, everyone thought he was hiding or had gone to the bathroom. Then panic set in. The school was locked down. Police were called. Parents clutched their children tightly as officers searched every closet, bathroom, and classroom. Marco was gone. The days that followed were a blur of search parties, news vans, and police interviews. Natalie replayed every moment of that night in her mind. Who had access backstage? Did she see anyone unfamiliar? Why didn't she notice Marco was missing sooner? The guilt ate her alive. No ransom note ever came. No body was ever found. The security cameras had malfunctioned that night, later discovered to be deliberately tampered with. The case went cold, despite the Reyes family's desperate pleas and the missing posters that papered the town. Natalie couldn't face teaching after that. She left Oak Ridge, moved to another state, and tried to outrun her nightmares. For 5 years, she built a new life working at a publishing company, but the guilt followed her like a shadow. Then came the anonymous email, "You missed something important that night. Come back to Oak Ridge." Natalie didn't tell anyone about the message. Not the police, not her therapist. Something about it felt genuine, desperate. After weeks of sleepless nights, she made a decision. She would return to Oak Ridge, face her demons, and maybe, just maybe, find answers. When she saw the for sale sign on the old Craftsman house just 3 blocks from Oak Ridge Elementary, it felt like fate. The price was suspiciously low for the neighborhood. The real estate agent explained that the previous owner, an elderly man named Edward Bennett, had died with no heirs. The house needed work, but Natalie saw it as a project to keep her hands busy while she quietly searched for answers. She never expected those answers would begin in her own attic, with the discovery of a golden costume that should not have been there. The attic stairs creaked under Natalie's weight as she climbed, flashlight in hand. She'd owned the house for exactly 3 weeks, focusing on the main floor renovations while ignoring the mysterious hatch in the hallway ceiling. Today was the day to face whatever dust and cobwebs awaited above. The air was thick and stale, Dust particles danced in the beam of her flashlight. The space was larger than she expected, with sloped ceilings and a small window that let in weak gray light. Boxes and old furniture created dark shadows in the corners. "Just junk," she muttered, picking her way through the abandoned belongings of Edward Bennett. Old tax records. Christmas decorations from the 1990s. Moth-eaten clothes. Nothing valuable or interesting. Until she reached the far corner. A small trunk sat beneath a water-stained cardboard box. Something about its placement felt deliberate, like it had been hidden. Natalie dragged it into the light, brushing away years of dust. The lock was broken, hanging uselessly from the latch. Inside were children's items. A baseball glove, comic books, action figures still in their packaging. Strange things for an elderly man with no family to keep. Beneath them was something folded in tissue paper. Natalie unwrapped it carefully, and the world tilted beneath her feet. Gold velvet, puffed sleeves, a maroon sash, a paper crown. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. This wasn't just any costume. She had helped make this costume. She remembered sewing on the left sleeve that had torn during dress rehearsal. She remembered the small stain on the collar where Marco had spilled apple juice. Details no replica could have. This was Marco's prince costume. The same costume he was wearing when he vanished into thin air. Natalie stumbled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. How was this possible? Why would Edward Bennett, a man she'd never met, have Marco's costume hidden in his attic? She fumbled for her phone, dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Emergency services. What's your situation?" "I found evidence in a missing child case," she stammered. "The costume Marco Reyes was wearing when he disappeared 5 years ago. It's in my attic. The previous owner must have taken him." An hour later, 2 officers stood in her living room. Detective Wilson was young, skeptical. Sergeant Tanner was older. Remembered the case. "And you're certain this is the actual costume?" Wilson asked, turning the small garment in his gloved hands. "Absolutely certain," Natalie said. "I helped make it. See that repair on the sleeve? I did that myself." Sergeant Tanner sighed. "Problem is, Miss Hayes, Edward Bennett died 6 months ago. If he was involved, we can't exactly question him now. But this proves he took Marco. We need to search the entire house, the property. It proves the costume ended up here somehow," Wilson cut in. "Maybe Bennett found it discarded somewhere and kept it. Maybe someone gave it to him not knowing what it was. That's ridiculous. This costume disappeared with Marco." Tanner looked at her with something like pity. "Look, we'll log this as evidence and inform the Reyes family. But without more to go on, I'm not sure what else we can do." After they left with the costume in an evidence bag, Natalie stood in her living room, shaking with anger and frustration. The police weren't going to pursue this. They'd file the costume away, write a report, and the case would go cold again. She looked up at the attic hatch. If Edward Bennett had hidden Marco's costume in her house, what else might be hidden here? And why had she received that email, urging her back to Oak Ridge just months after Bennett died? Natalie made a decision. If the police wouldn't find answers, she would. The next morning, Natalie stood on the doorstep of a modest blue house with faded tricycles in the yard. Her heart pounded as she raised her hand to knock. The Reyes family had every reason to hate her. She was the teacher who lost their son. The door opened, revealing a woman with tired eyes and streaks of gray in her black hair. Maria Reyes had aged far beyond the 5 years since Natalie had seen her.
"Miss Hayes?"
Recognition flickered across her face, followed by confusion. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you about Marco," Natalie said softly. Inside, the house was a shrine frozen in time. Marco's school pictures still hung on the walls. A growth chart stopped abruptly at age 5. Carlos Reyes joined them, his once jovial face now permanently marked by grief. Natalie told them everything. Her return to Oak Ridge, the house purchase, the costume in the attic. She showed them photos she'd taken on her phone before the police took the costume away. Maria clutched the phone, tears streaming down her face. "That's his costume. Look, Carlos. The seam I fixed when he tore it practicing his bow. The little crown I stayed up making the night before." Carlos studied Natalie with suspicion. "Why did you come back? After all this time?" Natalie hesitated, then showed them the anonymous email. "Someone wanted me back here. Someone who knows something." "And the police?" Carlos asked. "They took the costume, but they don't seem to think it's enough to reopen the investigation seriously. Edward Bennett is dead, so they see it as a dead end." "Of course," Carlos said bitterly. "Just like they gave up after 6 months. Just like they suggested Marco might have wandered into the woods by himself despite being inside a locked school." Maria touched her husband's arm. "What are you going to do now, Miss Hayes?" "I'm going to find out who Edward Bennett was and why he had Marco's costume, and I'm not stopping until I know what happened to your son." The determination in her voice surprised even herself. That afternoon, Natalie visited the county records office. Edward Bennett had purchased the house 4 years ago, almost a year after Marco's disappearance. Before that, there was no record of him in Oak Ridge. "That's odd," the clerk said, peering at her computer screen. "His social security number only shows up in our systems 5 years ago. It's like he didn't exist before then." Natalie felt a chill. "Is that possible?" The clerk shrugged. "Could be a data error. Or he changed his identity." Natalie finished. Next stop, Oak Ridge Elementary. The school secretary, Judy Coleman, had been there forever. If anyone knew about connections between the school and Edward Bennett, it would be her. "Bennett?" Judy frowned at the name. "Doesn't ring a bell as a parent or staff? What about contractors? Maintenance workers? Anyone who had access to the building around the time of Marco's disappearance?" Judy's eyes widened. "Wait, are you looking into that again? After all this time?" "Please, Judy, it's important." The secretary hesitated, then began typing. "We had several contractors that year. The district was renovating the heating systems in all the schools." She scanned the screen. "There was a maintenance company called Summit Services. They had several employees rotating through the schools. Would they have had access during the spring play?" "Absolutely. They were finishing up work that week. They had keys to the building." Natalie felt her pulse quicken. "Do you have employee records?" "That would be in the district office files," Judy said, then lowered her voice. "But I can tell you this, after Marco disappeared, the police questioned everyone, including the maintenance workers. One of them stopped showing up to work right after. The company said he quit without notice." "Do you remember his name?" Judy shook her head. "Just that he was older, kept to himself. All I remember is thinking it was strange timing." That evening, Natalie spread her findings across her kitchen table. A timeline was forming. A maintenance worker disappears right after Marco vanishes. A year later, Edward Bennett, a man with seemingly no past, buys a house 3 blocks from the school. Could they be the same person? Her phone rang, startling her. Unknown number. "Hello? Miss Hayes. It was Carlos Reyes. Maria and I have been talking. We want to help with your investigation. The police showed us the costume today. Seeing it after all this time, we can't just sit back anymore." "Carlos, there's something else," he interrupted. "Something we never told the police because it seemed unimportant at the time. Marco mentioned a fix-it man at school in the weeks before he disappeared. He said the man showed him secret places in the school where nobody could find them." Natalie's blood ran cold. A maintenance worker. We thought he was just playing pretend. But now, with what you've found, Carlos, I need you to meet me tomorrow. Bring any photos you have of Marco from that last month, school events, the play rehearsals, anything. We need to see if this fix-it man appears in the background." After hanging up, Natalie stared at her notes. The police might have given up, but she was just getting started. Somewhere in this house were answers. Somewhere in this town was the truth. And maybe, just maybe, there was still hope of finding Marco Reyes. Dawn broke over Oak Ridge as Natalie pried up floorboards in her spare bedroom. She hadn't slept. After her call with Carlos, she'd started seeing her house differently, not as a fixer-upper, but as a potential crime scene. Every squeaky step, every hollow wall, every locked cabinet became suspicious. The basement had yielded nothing unusual. The walls were solid, the foundation unbroken. But this room, the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, had uneven floorboards that didn't match the rest of the house. Her crowbar caught the edge of a plank, and it came up with surprising ease, as if it had been removed before. Beneath was a small space, just large enough for a shoebox. Inside, a plastic bag containing a child's sock, a small toy car, and a folded piece of paper. Natalie opened it with shaking hands. A crude crayon drawing of a crown, in wobbly handwriting at the bottom. Prince Marco. Her phone buzzed. Carlos had arrived with the photos. Downstairs, the Reyes couple spread dozens of pictures across Natalie's living room floor. School events, birthday parties, and several from play rehearsals. "Look at the backgrounds," Natalie instructed. "Anyone unfamiliar, especially maintenance workers, janitors." They hunched over photos with magnifying glasses, studying faces in the backgrounds. An hour passed with nothing significant. Then Maria gasped. Here. It was a photo from the dress rehearsal. Marco, in his costume, center stage. In the background, partially visible in the wings, was a man in gray coveralls. His face was blurry but distinguishable. Older, with a receding hairline and glasses. "I've seen him," Carlos said. "He was always working on something at the school." Natalie grabbed her laptop, pulled up the county death records. Edward Bennett's obituary included a photo. Same receding hairline, same glasses, older but unmistakably the same man. "It's him," she whispered. Carlos stood abruptly. "We're taking this to the police." "Wait," Natalie said. "I found something else." She showed them the box from under the floorboards. "This was hidden in the house. The drawing is Marco's, isn't it?" Maria covered her mouth, nodding through tears. "The police dismissed the costume," Natalie continued. "We need more evidence before going back to them. We need to understand what happened." "What are you suggesting?" Carlos asked. "I need to find out who Edward Bennett really was. And I think I know where to start." Summit Services had gone out of business 3 years ago, but Natalie tracked down the former owner, now running a hardware store in the next town. Dale Thompson was reluctant to talk at first, until Natalie mentioned Marco's name. "That was a terrible thing," he said, suddenly solemn. "Police questioned all my employees." "Including the one who quit right after?" "What was his name?" Dale hesitated. "Richard Keller. Worked for me about a year. Kept to himself, but was good with his hands. When he didn't show up after the kid went missing, I figured he just couldn't handle the police scrutiny." "Do you have a photo? Employment records?" "That was years ago, but he disappeared into a back office, returned with a faded employee file. Inside was a photocopy of a driver's license. Richard Keller. Same face as Edward Bennett. He changed his name," Natalie muttered.
"What's that?"
"Nothing. Can I make a copy of this?" Later, at the local library, Natalie searched newspaper archives for Richard Keller. Nothing in Oak Ridge, but a hit from a town called Millfield, about 60 miles north. An article from 7 years ago about a school renovation project with Keller briefly quoted as a maintenance supervisor. On a hunch, she searched for missing children in Millfield. Her heart stopped. 8 years ago, a 7-year-old girl named Zoe Mitchell had disappeared walking home from school. Case never solved. The next day, Natalie drove to Millfield. The local newspaper office allowed her to look through their photo archives. In pictures of the school renovation, there was Keller in the background, working at the same school Zoe attended. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. Back in Oak Ridge, Natalie found Carlos waiting on her porch. "The police won't listen," he said before she could speak. "They say Bennett's death closes any avenue of investigation unless we have concrete evidence of a crime." "I found something worse than evidence of one crime," Natalie replied, showing him what she'd discovered. "I think Bennett or Keller did this before, and I think he might have done it again after Marco." Carlos stared at the articles, his face hardening. "We need to search his house, your house, more thoroughly." They spent the night removing baseboards, checking for hollow spaces in walls, searching for any hidden area where someone might have concealed evidence or a child. The work was exhausting and emotionally draining, but Natalie couldn't stop. Every nail she pulled, every baseboard she removed, might lead to Marco. At 2 a.m., Carlos found it, a patch of wall in the basement that sounded different when tapped. Together they pried off the drywall, revealing a small hidden room barely the size of a closet. The space was empty, except for a plastic storage bin. Inside, children's clothes, small shoes, a backpack with dinosaurs on it, a child's toothbrush, and a journal with dates and locations. "Oh my God," Natalie whispered, paging through the journal. The entries were in code, but some were clear enough. M adjusting well, and M still asking for mother. Carlos grabbed the journal, flipping frantically through pages. "He kept him alive," he said, voice breaking. "At least for a while after taking him." The last entry was dated 3 years ago, moving M to secure location. EW will take over care. "You," Natalie repeated. "Who is EW?" The next morning, they brought their evidence to Detective Wilson. "This is deeply disturbing," he admitted, examining the journal. "But the last entry is from 3 years ago, and these initials—" "But you'll reopen the investigation?" Carlos pressed.
"Yes, we'll get a team to search the house properly, and I'll request case files from Millfield regarding Zoe Mitchell." But he hesitated. "But what?" Natalie demanded. "I need you both to step back and let us handle this. Amateur detective work could compromise evidence." Natalie and Carlos reluctantly agreed, but outside the station their resolve hardened. "They won't move fast enough," Carlos said, "and they won't look for EW with the urgency needed." "I know," Natalie replied, "which is why we need to find EW ourselves." They compiled a list of everyone connected to the school, the play, and Edward Bennett with the initials EW. The list was discouragingly long. But one name stood out. Eleanor Wright had been a regular school volunteer, a woman in her 50s who helped with the spring play. Natalie vaguely remembered her, quiet, always eager to help with the children. She had moved away the summer after Marco disappeared. The yearbook confirmed it. Eleanor Wright in a group photo of parent volunteers. Natalie hadn't noticed at the time, but in the picture, Eleanor stood near the maintenance man now identified as Richard Keller Edward Bennett, not interacting, but in proximity. A social media search revealed nothing for Eleanor Wright from Oak Ridge. But expanding the search, Natalie found an Eleanor White in Ferndale, the next county over, who looked strikingly similar, just with dyed hair and glasses. "It could be a coincidence," Carlos said, studying the profile picture. "Or it could be our EW," Natalie replied. That night, Natalie's house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but her research was scattered across the floor, her computer smashed.
Most disturbing was the note left on her pillow: "Stop looking or the boy dies." The boy. Not past tense. Detective Wilson took the threat seriously, assigning an officer to watch Natalie's house. But warnings came from a legal direction too. Wilson informed her that interfering with a police investigation could result in obstruction charges. "They're trying to stop us because we're getting close," Natalie told Carlos during a clandestine meeting at a cafe the next town over. "But what if the threat is real?" Carlos asked, voice hollow. "What if pursuing this puts Marco in danger?" The question hung between them, heavy with impossible choices. After 5 years of uncertainty and grief, the possibility that Marco might be alive was both miraculous and terrifying. What if their actions led to harm? "I think," Natalie said slowly, "that whoever has Marco is already scared. These threats mean we're close to something. And if Marco is alive, he's been captive for 5 years, we can't leave him there." Carlos nodded, determination replacing fear in his eyes. "What's our next move?" "Eleanor White in Ferndale. We need to know if she's our EW." As they left the cafe, neither noticed the sedan parked across the street, nor the woman watching them through the windshield, her hand hovering over a phone. The house in Ferndale sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by a tall wooden fence. From their parked car, Natalie and Carlos observed the unremarkable 2-story home with its neatly trimmed lawn and closed curtains. "This feels surreal," Carlos whispered. "After 5 years of nothing, to think my son might be just inside that house." "We don't know for sure," Natalie cautioned, though her heart raced at the possibility. "We need confirmation that Eleanor White is Eleanor Wright before we do anything." They had a simple plan. Natalie would pose as a census worker, try to get a look inside the house, perhaps confirm if a child lived there. As she approached the front door, clipboard in hand, Natalie's teacher instincts tingled. The yard was immaculate, but had no toys, no bicycles, nothing suggesting a child. Yet the fence was unusually high, and she noticed cameras mounted discreetly at the corners of the house. She rang the doorbell, pulse pounding in her throat. Footsteps approached. The door opened a crack, secured by a chain. A woman with gray blonde hair and glasses peered out. Yes. Despite the different hair color and glasses, Natalie instantly recognized Eleanor Wright, the volunteer who had always been so helpful with the kindergartners. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm with the Regional Census Bureau, following up on some incomplete data. Could I ask you a few quick questions?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "I've already completed my census form." "Yes, but there seems to be some confusion about the number of occupants at this address." A flicker of something, alarm, crossed Eleanor's face. "I live alone." Natalie's trained ear caught it, a muffled thump from somewhere inside the house, like something being knocked over. Eleanor heard it too, her head turning slightly. "What was that?" Natalie asked innocently. "My cat," Eleanor replied too quickly. "I really can't talk now. Please leave your form and I'll mail it back." As the door began to close, Natalie caught a glimpse past Eleanor's shoulder, a child's drawing magnetized to the refrigerator, a crude crown identical to the one in the drawing they'd found under the floorboards. The door shut firmly. Natalie heard multiple locks engaging. Back at the car, she described what she'd seen to Carlos, whose hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "We need to call the police," he said, reaching for his phone. "Wait." Natalie caught his wrist. "Look." Eleanor had emerged from the house, locking the door behind her. She hurried to a car in the driveway, glancing around nervously before driving away. "She's leaving," Natalie said. "This might be our only chance to confirm if Marco's in there."
"You want to break in?"
"That's illegal if we're wrong." "If we're right, your son has been imprisoned for 5 years," Natalie countered. "I'll go. You stay here as lookout. If Eleanor returns, call me immediately." Before Carlos could protest further, Natalie was out of the car, moving quickly along the fence line to the backyard. She found what she was looking for, a section of fence with loose boards. Squeezing through, she entered the backyard. The back of the house revealed what the front concealed: heavy security bars on all windows, curtains drawn tight, a secondary alarm system. Natalie approached a window, cupping her hands against the glass to peer through a gap in the curtains. The interior was dark, but she could make out a normal-looking living room. Then her eye caught movement, a small figure darting past a doorway deeper in the house. A child. She tapped gently on the window. The shape reappeared cautiously. A boy, around 10 years old, thin with dark hair. He stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. Natalie's heart skipped. The age was right. The general appearance matched what Marco might look like now, but she couldn't be certain it was him. She mouthed slowly, "Marco?" The boy's face registered confusion, then something like a distant recognition. Natalie tried the back door, locked as expected. She searched for another entry point, growing increasingly desperate. Then she noticed a small bathroom window cracked open at the top. Standing on a garden bench, she could just reach it. The opening was small, but so was she. With effort, she squeezed through, tumbling awkwardly onto the bathroom floor. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Natalie moved cautiously through the hallway, listening for any sound that might lead her to the child she'd glimpsed. "Hello?" she whispered. "I'm here to help. You're safe." A door creaked open down the hall. The boy peered out, still fearful. Natalie knelt to appear less threatening. "Hi there. My name is Natalie. I'm looking for someone who's been missing for a long time. A boy named Marco Reyes." The boy's expression remained blank. Then, hesitantly, he spoke, "My name is Michael. Michael White. I live with my mom." Natalie's heart sank. Had she been wrong? Was this a different child entirely? "How long have you lived with your mom?" she asked gently. "Forever," the boy replied automatically, like a rehearsed answer, but his eyes darted away, uncertain. "Michael, do you remember a golden costume, like a prince might wear?" The boy's face changed subtly, a flash of recognition quickly suppressed. He shook his head vigorously. "I need to go now. Mom doesn't like visitors when she's not home." As he turned to retreat, Natalie noticed a small birthmark behind his ear, a distinctive shape like a crescent moon. She remembered it clearly from Marco's file. Not something that would show in most photos, but a detail the Reyes had mentioned to police. "Wait," she called softly. "I know about the prince costume in the attic. I know about the drawing with the crown." The boy froze. "I know you've been told your name is Michael, but a long time ago you were called Marco, and your real parents have been looking for you every day since you disappeared." The boy Marco turned slowly, his face a storm of confusion and buried memories. "She said my parents didn't want me anymore. She said she saved me." "That's not true," Natalie said, her voice breaking. "Your mom and dad are heartbroken without you. Your dad is outside right now." Marco's eyes widened with mingled fear and hope. Then his gaze shifted to something behind Natalie, and terror washed over his face. "She's back," he whispered. Natalie whirled around to find Eleanor White standing in the hallway, car keys in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. "I knew someone was watching the house," Eleanor said with eerie calm. "Richard warned me this might happen someday." "Eleanor," Natalie said carefully, positioning herself between the woman and Marco, "you don't have to do this. Richard is gone. It's over." Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "Over, we saved these children from neglect, from parents who didn't deserve them. Michael is my son now. His name is Marco Reyes, and his real parents have been searching for him for 5 years. Eleanor's face hardened. Those people let him wander around backstage alone. Anyone could have taken him, so I did, for his own protection. Behind Natalie, Marco made a small, wounded sound. Memories were surfacing, confusion giving way to understanding.
"You were the cookie lady," he said, his voice small but growing certain. "At school, you helped with costumes."
Eleanor's expression softened when she looked at him. "You remember, I always gave you extra cookies because you were so polite, so different from the other children. You took me from my mom and dad," Marco said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You made me forget them."
"I gave you a better life."
Eleanor's voice rose sharply. "Richard and I protected you." Natalie's phone buzzed in her pocket. Carlos, surely warning that Eleanor had returned. "Eleanor," Natalie said calmly. Though her heart hammered, "Carlos is outside. The police are on their way. There's nowhere to go. Please, put down the knife." Eleanor's gaze darted between Natalie, Marco, and the front of the house. For a moment, Natalie thought she might surrender. Instead, Eleanor lunged forward, knife raised. Natalie shoved Marco behind her as Eleanor charged. The knife slashed down, catching Natalie's arm. Pain flared hot and sharp. "Run!" she screamed to Marco. "Out the back door." The boy hesitated for just a second, then bolted. Eleanor tried to follow, but Natalie grabbed her ankle, sending her crashing to the floor. The knife skittered across the hardwood. Eleanor kicked free, scrambling for the weapon. Natalie tackled her, and they grappled on the floor, Eleanor's strength surprising for her age. "You don't understand what you're doing," Eleanor hissed. "There are others, children who need us." "You're not saving anyone," Natalie gasped as they struggled. "You're stealing lives." A crash from the front door. Carlos had heard the commotion and broken in. He rushed down the hallway, taking in the scene with wide eyes. Natalie pinned beneath Eleanor, blood streaming from her arm. "Where's Marco?" he demanded. "Ran out back," Natalie managed. Carlos sprinted through the house toward the back door. Eleanor used the distraction to wrench free, grabbing the knife and staggering to her feet. She lunged at Natalie again, but her foot slipped in the blood on the floor. She fell hard, the knife plunging into her own thigh. Eleanor screamed, clutching her leg as blood pulsed between her fingers. Natalie crawled away, pressing her own wound. Outside, she heard Carlos calling Marco's name, his voice breaking with emotion. Sirens wailed in the distance. Help was coming. Natalie slumped against the wall, lightheaded from blood loss, watching Eleanor writhe on the floor. "Why?" Natalie asked, her voice weak. "Why Marco? Why any of them?" Eleanor's face twisted with pain and something like righteousness. Children who needed better than what they had, special children being wasted on undeserving parents. And the others? EW will take over care, that's what the journal said. How many children did you and Bennett take? A strange smile crossed Eleanor's face. Enough to make a difference. Richard had the vision. I have the mothering touch the children needed. The front door burst open again. Police officers swarming in, shouting commands. Eleanor was handcuffed despite her injury. Paramedics rushed to Natalie's side, and the house was secured room by room. But Natalie's thoughts were outside, where she could hear Carlos's muffled sobs. Had they found Marco? Was he safe? She tried to rise, but the paramedic gently pushed her back. "Let's take care of this arm first," he insisted, wrapping a pressure bandage around the wound. Detective Wilson appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Miss Hayes? What the hell happened here?" "Marco," she said weakly. "Did they find Marco?" Wilson's expression softened slightly. "They found a boy in the backyard. Carlos is with him now." The relief was so intense, it left her dizzy. Or maybe that was the blood loss. Hours later, At the hospital, Natalie sat on an exam table, her arm freshly stitched and bandaged. Detective Wilson took her statement, his initial anger giving way to reluctant admiration for her detective work. "You took an enormous risk," he said, "breaking into that house alone."
I wasn't alone. Carlos was outside.
Still reckless, but Wilson sighed. "You found Marco Reyes when our department couldn't. That counts for something." "Have you spoken to him yet?" Natalie asked. "Marco?" "Briefly, he's confused, traumatized. Calls himself Michael half the time. Says Eleanor and Uncle Richard told him his parents abandoned him, but that he sometimes had dreams about his before life." Natalie's throat tightened. "And the other children mentioned in the journal?" Wilson's face darkened. "We're working on that. Eleanor White isn't talking, but we found documents hidden in her house. Names, dates, locations. It appears she and Bennett were part of a network that abducted at least 6 children over the past decade." "My God," Natalie whispered. "There's something else," Wilson said hesitantly. "When we searched the basement, we found a hidden room. Inside was a boy about 12 years old. Says his name is Timothy Green. Been missing from Portland for 3 years. 2 children. In the same house." The horror of it stole Natalie's breath. "Can I see Marco?" she asked when she could speak again. "He's with his parents now," Wilson replied, "and a child psychologist. It's going to be a long road. He barely remembers them." Natalie nodded, understanding the complex journey ahead for the Reyes family. Marco had been 5 when taken, young enough that his memories could be reshaped, his identity altered. 5 years of psychological manipulation had convinced him he was Michael White, Eleanor's son. Undoing that damage would take time, patience, and professional help. As Wilson left, a nurse entered with discharge papers. "You have a visitor," she said. "Says he won't leave until he sees you." Carlos Reyes stepped into the room. His eyes red but his face transformed by tentative joy. "He asked for you," Carlos said simply. "When they were examining him at the hospital, he remembered you from the play, called you the teacher with the sparkly shoes." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks. She'd worn glittery silver flats the night of the performance, a small detail to delight her students. "He wants to thank you," Carlos continued. "When he's ready. Maria and we can never repay you for what you've done." "I just wanted to find answers," Natalie said. "For all of us." Carlos nodded, understanding the shared guilt they'd both carried for 5 years, him for letting his son out of his sight, her for not protecting her student. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The other children in that network—" "I know," Natalie replied. "But tonight one boy is back with his family, and that's a start." 3 days later, Natalie sat in Detective Wilson's office, surrounded by case files, maps, and timelines. Her arm throbbed beneath its bandages, a constant reminder of how close she'd come to a far worse injury. Eleanor White remained in custody, refusing to cooperate beyond vague statements about saving children from unfit parents. Timothy Green had been reunited with his family in Portland, while Marco, still struggling with his dual identities, was working with specialists to process his trauma. 6 children, Wilson said, tapping a map marked with red pins. "That's how many we've identified from Eleanor's records. 2 recovered, Marco and Timothy, 1 confirmed deceased, Zoe Mitchell." He pointed to a pin in Millfield. "Her remains were found in the woods 2 years ago." "And the other 3?" Natalie asked, studying the locations. "Still missing. Eleanor's notes suggest they were moved to different caretakers within their network." Wilson spread photographs across the desk. 3 children, smiling school portraits, taken before their lives were shattered. Bailey Nelson, age 7. Jasmine Cortez, age 6. Owen Hughes, age 8. "The pattern is consistent," Wilson continued. Elementary-aged children taken from schools or nearby locations, Bennett worked maintenance at each school, with Eleanor volunteering or working in some capacity. They selected their victims carefully, observed them for weeks.
And they had help.
Natalie added. Bennett's journal mentioned other names. Coded but clear enough to indicate at least 3 other accomplices. Wilson nodded grimly. We believe it's some kind of twisted rescue network. People who convince themselves they're saving children from perceived inadequate parenting. Natalie studied the map, the pins forming a rough circle within a 200-mile radius. They stayed regional. Never went far enough to trigger multi-state investigations. Smart. Calculated. Wilson's phone buzzed. He answered, listened intently, then hung up with a thoughtful expression. That was the tech team. They found encrypted emails on Eleanor's computer. They've cracked some of them. And references to someone called the matchmaker appears to be the organizer who connected rescuers with children they deemed in need of saving. A ringleader, Natalie said softly. Exactly. And they've traced IP addresses from some of the emails. One came from right here in Oak Ridge. The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone else in town, someone still here, was involved. As Natalie drove home that evening, her mind raced with possibilities. Who in Oak Ridge could be part of this network? Someone with access to children, someone who could observe and evaluate them without raising suspicion. A teacher? A pediatrician? A social worker? She was so absorbed in thought that she almost missed the car following her. A dark sedan that had turned when she turned maintained the same distance for several blocks. Natalie's pulse quickened. She made a sudden left turn down a residential street. The sedan followed. Definitely not coincidence. She pulled out her phone to call Wilson, but in the moment of distraction, she missed the SUV parked ahead until it pulled out, blocking the road. Natalie slammed on her brakes, then threw her car into reverse, only to find the sedan now directly behind her, boxing her in. Trapped. A man emerged from the SUV ahead, tall, well-dressed face obscured by the gathering dusk. Something about his confident stride sent ice through Natalie's veins. Her doors locked automatically when she shifted into park, but she knew that wouldn't stop someone determined. She reached for her phone again, but the man was already at her window, tapping lightly with his knuckle. He bent down, and recognition slammed into her. Dr. Raymond Shaw, the school district's longtime superintendent, the man who had hired both Bennett for maintenance work and Eleanor as a district reading specialist years ago. "Miss Hayes," he called through the glass. His voice muffled, but audible. "I think it's time we had a conversation." Natalie's finger hovered over the emergency call button. "I wouldn't do that," he said calmly. "Not if you want to help find those other children." That stopped her cold. The missing children. Bailey, Jasmine, Owen. Shaw smiled, seeing her hesitation. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because time is running out. Eleanor's arrest has put the network on alert. They'll be moving the children again, or worse. I need your help." "My help?" Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. "You found Marco when the police couldn't. You connected threads they missed for 5 years. And you care, really care about these children." Shaw stepped back, gesturing to his SUV. "Come with me. I'll explain everything on the way." Natalie stared at him through the glass, her mind racing through options. This could be a trap. Shaw might be the matchmaker, eliminating a threat to his organization. Or he might be telling the truth. And if he was, 3 children's lives hung in the balance. Natalie made her decision. She reached for the door handle. The SUV wound through unfamiliar back roads, headlights cutting through the dense evening fog. Natalie sat rigid in the passenger seat, surreptitiously recording on her phone, hidden in her jacket pocket. Shaw drove with both hands on the wheel, his academic demeanor incongruous with the circumstances. "I suppose you've figured out that I'm the matchmaker," he said without preamble. Natalie's blood ran cold at the casual admission. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because, contrary to what the police think, I want to help find those children and return them to their families." Natalie studied his profile, searching for deception. "You helped abduct them in the first place." Shaw sighed. "It's more complicated than that. The network wasn't my creation. I discovered it 5 years ago when I noticed peculiarities in Bennett's work schedule. He always requested assignments at specific schools, always took interest in certain children. And instead of reporting him, joined him." "I infiltrated them," Shaw corrected. "Positioned myself as sympathetic to their cause. They were already well established, calling themselves the Guardian Circle. True believers who thought they were rescuing children from harmful environments." Natalie's mind raced. Could this be true, or an elaborate lie? "Eleanor and Richard believed me," Shaw continued. "I became their coordinator, the matchmaker, connecting them with children they'd identified as at risk. But in that position, I could limit the damage, steer them away from some children, document everything for eventual prosecution." "If that's true," Natalie challenged, "why didn't you go to the police?" "I tried, once." Early on, Shaw's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "The officer I approached was Sergeant Douglas Crane." "Crane? He retired 2 years ago." "Yes. After receiving a very generous anonymous donation, turns out he was part of the network too. My attempt to expose them nearly got me killed." The SUV turned onto a narrow dirt road leading deep into the woods. Natalie's anxiety spiked. "Where are we going?" "A cabin owned by Gregory Foster, another network member. According to my information, he's holding Bailey Nelson there. Has been for almost 3 years. And the other children?" "Different locations. We'll find them too, but Bailey first. She's in most immediate danger since Eleanor's arrest." The SUV's headlights illuminated a small cabin ahead, nestled among towering pines. A single light burned in the window. "I need your help," Shaw said, parking a distance away. "Foster knows me, but he's skittish after Eleanor's arrest. If I approach alone, he might panic." "And do what? Hurt Bailey?" Shaw's expression darkened. "Or disappear with her. These people have escape plans. False identities ready. So what's your plan?" "You go to the door. Say your car broke down. Phone dead. Need to call for help. Get inside. Verify Bailey is there. I'll be right behind you." Natalie's instincts screamed that this was wrong, too risky, too dependent on trusting Shaw. "And if I refuse?" "Then I approach alone, and we hope for the best. But Bailey has a better chance with both of us." The weight of the decision pressed on Natalie. If Shaw was telling the truth and she refused to help, a child remained in danger. If he was lying, she thought of Marco, finally home after 5 years. Of Timothy Green, rescued from that basement room. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But I need a sign that Bailey is actually in there." Shaw pointed to the cabin. "See the wind chime on the porch? Blue glass dolphins. Bailey made that at school before she was taken. Foster keeps it as a cruel souvenir. It's her signature craft. Her mother confirmed it when I reached out anonymously." Natalie peered through the darkness. There was indeed a blue dolphin wind chime swaying gently in the breeze. "5 minutes," she said. "I go in, confirm Bailey is there, then you follow." Shaw nodded. "The moment you're sure, just say that's really kind of you. I'll know." The gravel crunched under Natalie's feet as she approached the cabin. Her heart threatened to burst from her chest. The porch steps creaked as she climbed them, passing beneath the dolphin wind chime, each piece shaped and painted by a child's careful hand. She knocked on the door, trying to steady her breathing. Footsteps approached. The door opened a crack, secured by a chain. A man's face appeared, mid-50s, beard streaked with gray, eyes wary.
Yes?
His voice was gruff. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Natalie said, summoning her most helpless smile. "My car broke down about half a mile back, and my phone's dead. Could I possibly use your phone to call for help?" Foster hesitated, suspicion written across his features. "There's no service out here. Landline only." "That's fine. I'd be so grateful. It's getting cold out here." After a long moment, Foster unlatched the chain. "Make it quick." The cabin's interior was rustic, but clean. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Fishing equipment hung on the walls. Nothing immediately suggested a captive child. "Phone's in the kitchen," Foster said, gesturing toward a doorway. Natalie moved in that direction, scanning for any sign of Bailey. Nothing in the main room. The kitchen was small and utilitarian. A phone hung on the wall. "Go ahead," Foster prompted, watching her carefully. Natalie picked up the receiver, pretending to dial. "Hello? Yes? I need roadside assistance." She continued the fake conversation while examining the cabin. No toys, no children's clothes, nothing to indicate Bailey's presence. Had Shaw lied to her? Foster seemed increasingly agitated. "Wrap it up. I don't like unexpected visitors." "Of course," Natalie said, replacing the receiver. "Thank you. That's really—" Her words cut off as she noticed something on the refrigerator. A child's drawing partially hidden behind a calendar. A girl with long dark hair, like Bailey Nelson had in her school photo, standing beside a bearded man labeled Uncle Greg. In the background was a blue dolphin wind chime. "That's really kind of you," Natalie finished, giving the signal. Foster's eyes narrowed. "You need to leave. Now." A knock at the door made him jump. Before he could react, Shaw's voice called out, "Greg, it's Raymond. We need to talk." Fear flashed across Foster's face. He grabbed Natalie's arm roughly. "Who are you? What is this?"
Where is she?
Natalie demanded, dropping all pretense. "Where's Bailey?" Foster shoved Natalie against the wall, his forearm pressing against her throat. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed. The front door burst open. Shaw rushed in, followed by, to Natalie's shock, Detective Wilson and two uniformed officers, guns drawn. "Gregory Foster, you're under arrest," Wilson announced. "Release her now and put your hands up." Foster's arm pressed harder for a moment, then dropped away. As officers handcuffed him, Natalie gasped for breath. "I'm sorry for the deception," Shaw said quietly. "Wilson and I have been working together since Eleanor's arrest. I couldn't risk telling you in case Foster was watching." Wilson nodded confirmation. "Shaw came to me 3 days ago with everything, documentation of the entire network, all the children's locations. We've been planning simultaneous raids, but we needed to confirm Bailey was actually here." "She is here," Natalie said, pointing to the drawing. "But where?" A small sound caught their attention, a soft thump from beneath the floor. Wilson motioned the officers toward Foster. "Where is she?" Foster remained silent, a bitter smile on his face. Shaw walked to the center of the room, examining the floorboards. Many of these cabins have root cellars. He knelt, running his hands along the edges of a large woven rug. Pulling it aside, revealed a trapdoor with a padlock. "Get the bolt cutters," Wilson ordered an officer. Minutes later, the lock was cut. Wilson and Shaw lifted the heavy door, revealing a ladder descending into darkness.
"Bailey?"
Wilson called softly. "Bailey Nelson, we're here to take you home." Silence. Then a small voice from below. "Are you the police?" "Yes, sweetheart. The real police. Your mom and dad sent us to find you." A small face appeared at the bottom of the ladder, peering up with a mixture of fear and hope. Dark hair, thin face, eyes that had seen too much. Bailey Nelson, now 10 years old, 3 years after her abduction. He said they didn't want me anymore, she said, her voice trembling. That was a lie, Natalie said gently, kneeling by the opening. They've been looking for you every day. They never stopped. Tears filled Bailey's eyes. Really? Really, Natalie promised. I've met them. They have your room exactly the way you left it, waiting for you to come home. Bailey began to climb the ladder, her movements cautious. When she reached the top, she threw herself into Natalie's arms, sobbing with relief. Over the child's shoulder, Natalie met Shaw's gaze. He nodded once, confirming what she now understood. His role as the matchmaker had indeed been an elaborate undercover operation to bring down the network from within. As Wilson radioed for backup and paramedics, Natalie held Bailey close, whispering reassurances. Outside, more police cars arrived, lights flashing through the trees. The night that had begun in fear was ending in rescue. But 2 children still remained missing, and the network, though wounded, was not yet destroyed. 1 month later, Natalie stood in the courthouse corridor, watching raindrops trace patterns down the tall windows. The preliminary hearing for Eleanor White had just concluded, with the judge denying bail due to flight risk. Gregory Foster's hearing would follow later that week. Dr. Shaw, now officially recognized as an undercover operative who had infiltrated the network at great personal risk, had provided evidence leading to 12 arrests across 3 counties. His documentation was meticulous, detailing every communication, every child targeted, every participant in what the media now called the Guardian Circle. Most crucially, his evidence had led to the recovery of all 3 remaining children. After Bailey's rescue, police had found Jasmine Cortez living with a retired teacher in a coastal town, believing she had been legally adopted. Owen Hughes was discovered in a remote mountain community, told that his parents had died in an accident. All alive. All finally home.
Miss Hayes.
Natalie turned to find Maria Reyes approaching, her face transformed from the hollowed grief of a month ago. There was still pain there, still trauma, but also life. I wanted to thank you again, Maria said, embracing her. The prosecutor says your testimony today was compelling. How is Marco doing? Natalie asked. Maria's smile was bittersweet. Better. Some days he still calls himself Michael. Some nights he has terrible nightmares. But the therapist says he's making remarkable progress. She hesitated. He asks about you. I'd love to see him when he's ready. Actually, Maria said, that's why I came looking for you. He's here in the courthouse daycare while we attended the hearing. He asked if you could come say hello. The daycare center was bright and cheerful, staffed by professionals trained to handle children with trauma backgrounds. Marco sat at a small table, carefully coloring a picture. He looked up as Natalie entered, his eyes lighting with recognition. Miss Hayes, he called, the greeting simultaneously surprising and natural. This was both the 5-year-old boy she had known and a new 10-year-old she was just meeting. Hi, Marco, she said softly, taking the chair he offered. That's a beautiful drawing. He nodded seriously. It's for Detective Wilson. It's all of us kids who got rescued. The picture showed 5 children of different sizes holding hands in front of a police station, with adults standing protectively behind them. That's me, he pointed. And that's Bailey and Timothy and Jasmine and Owen. We're going to have a picnic next month. Mom says it's important for us to be friends because we understand each other. That's very true. Natalie agreed, marveling at the resilience of children. Marco studied her face. Dad says you got hurt finding me. Natalie touched her arm, where the bandage had been replaced by a healing pink scar. Just a little. It was worth it. Marco nodded, processing this. Eleanor told me you didn't look for me. She said nobody looked for me.
That wasn't true.
Natalie said gently. So many people looked for you, every day. I know that now. Marco returned to his coloring, then asked without looking up, "Was it my fault that I got taken?" The question broke Natalie's heart. No, Marco, never. Bad people did a bad thing. None of it was your fault. He absorbed this, then asked, "Was it your fault?" The question caught her off guard. "Mom said you thought it was your fault. I disappeared, that you felt bad for a long time." Tears welled in Natalie's eyes. For 5 years, she had carried that burden, the teacher who lost a student, who missed the danger signs, who didn't protect a child in her care. "I felt responsible," she admitted. "I was your teacher." Marco considered this with the directness only children possess. "But you found me. So now you don't have to feel bad anymore." Out of the mouths of babes. Natalie smiled through her tears. Later, standing on the courthouse steps with Carlos and Maria, Natalie watched Marco chatting with another boy his age, Timothy Green, also there for his rescuer's hearing. The two boys had formed a bond that defied explanation to outsiders, but made perfect sense to those who understood their shared journey. "The therapist says they'll always carry this with them," Carlos said, following her gaze, "that we can't expect them to just bounce back to who they were before." "But they survived," Natalie said. "They're home. They have a chance to heal." Maria squeezed her hand. "We all do." As the Reyes family prepared to leave, Marco ran back to Natalie, handing her a folded paper. "I made this for you," he said, then dashed back to his parents. Alone in her car, Natalie unfolded the drawing. It showed a stick figure with curly hair standing beside a house. Above the figure, in careful block letters, "Thank you for finding me." Natalie traced the words with her finger, tears flowing freely now. For 5 years, she had lived with the weight of a child vanished during her watch. That burden would never completely disappear, just as Marco would never fully forget his years as Michael White. Some wounds leave permanent scars. But scars also mark survival. They tell the story of wounds that didn't win, of darkness that eventually gave way to light. As she drove away from the courthouse, Natalie glanced at the drawing on her passenger seat. 5 children rescued. 12 criminals facing justice. A network of predators exposed and dismantled. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would be hard days ahead for all of them. Healing wasn't a straight line, but a winding path with setbacks and struggles. Yet Marco was home. Timothy was home. Bailey, Jasmine, and Owen were home. And in its own imperfect way, that was enough. That's the end of the story. Would you have risked everything to save Marco like Natalie did? Hit subscribe so you never miss another thriller. There's another shocking story waiting for you right now.